We're going to be in the Old Testament for a change. Turn to the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 3. Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. If you get to Hosea, you're just a little past. Little boy went to school for the first time. His name was Jose. And he felt so at home, they sung to him. Jose, can you see by the dawn's early light? Daniel chapter 3. It's a lengthy scripture. It's hard. It's probably the hardest one in the Bible to read out loud. And you'll see why in a little bit. If I can keep my tongue from getting tangled up, I'll be all right. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits, that's 90 feet. Whose breadth was 6 cubits, that's 9 feet. Set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So you see what I mean. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, all the people and nations and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, and spoke and said unto King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down to worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not you serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, if you be ready that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image which I've made, well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful, that is, we're not worried to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not," that is, if he doesn't, "be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the form of his visage, that is, the expression of his face, was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, that's turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spoke and said to his counselors, "Did not we cast three men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said unto the king, "True, O king." That's what they said every time. He answered and said, "Lo, I see four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God." Or it could be rendered like a son of the gods. Either way. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth out of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, captains, and the king's counselors being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of the fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and trusted his servants and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which shall speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill or a garbage dump, because there's no other God that can deliver after this sort." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Yes. In the year 168 BC, a Syrian king named Antiochus, he was Antiochus the Fourth. The city Antioch got its name from him and his predecessors. The Antiochuses, I guess you'd call them. Antiochus the Fourth, one of the most ruthless and wicked and barbarous kings of the ancient world, or of any time for that matter. Could have given Hitler a run for his money. He was so wicked. He invaded Judea. There's more to it than this, just like there's more to the Civil War in America than slavery. But the issue that got the Jews all stirred up against him was that he invaded the temple, set up his own image in the temple, and commanded that he be worshipped. Desecrated the altar of sacrifice, killed hogs on it. Hogs not kosher, and a Jewish person have no contact with that. Just desecrated, defiled everything. Sparked a revolt known as the Jewish Revolt, led by a man, Judas the Hammer, or Judas Maccabeus, which means the hammer. Pretty long war, 2 or 3 years, and the Jews gained independence, and they had independence until for over 100 years, or close to 100 years, when the Romans came and took over. Antiochus Epiphanes had stirred up a hornet's nest when he defiled the temple. There was a great rallying of the Jewish people against him. Even though there were different parties and factions among the Jews, they were united against a common enemy and fought for a common cause. Many of those Jews of that day thought that Judas Maccabeus must be the Messiah. And the Maccabees ruled in Jerusalem for a good lengthy dynasty. The Hasmonean dynasty was the Maccabees. During that time, a book was written that was set about 400 years earlier, during the beginning of the exile. The book of Daniel, not written by Daniel, is written about Daniel. And Daniel is an actual historical person, and we have materials that come directly from Daniel, I'm sure, in this book. But this book was written to unite Jewish people that were being oppressed by Antiochus Epiphanes. By the way, the Antiochuses were the Seleucid dynasty of Syria, and they had gotten control of, I'm thinking, approximately 1/4 of Alexander the Great's conquering after he died in, I think, 323 BC. And there have been, a good while since then to 168. But the book of Daniel was written with a purpose in mind. When you read a book of the Bible, it sure helps to know why it was written and what the author was aiming at. And what the author of Daniel was aiming at was to use the stories of Daniel, who lived in a previous Jewish sort of almost Holocaust. By the way, been several Holocausts. I mean, Pharaoh killing all the boy babies, before the Exodus. They spend the Jewish lot to be an oppressed people a lot of times. And so this looks back at a previous time of oppression to encourage those during this time of oppression. And it's good for us to be able to do this. Because you see, Daniel and his 3 friends, whose real names were not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their real names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But see, when they were taken to Babylon, in the first deportation, that was just the nobility and just the smart kids, the ones that were college material, etc., that we would say today. They took the cream of the crop the first time, and they brought these young men into the king's schools for training to become eunuchs in the government. And the first story we have about him in chapter 1 is where Daniel purposed in his heart not to eat the food that had been offered to the idols, and not to violate the dietary laws and traditions that had come down through Moses. Risked his life, he and his 3 friends. And they stood together. And God blessed them. And at the end of the training, they were smarter, and they were more healthy, and they were better and wiser than all the rest. The point being, trust in the Lord, be faithful, He'll take care of you. And that's the theme all the way through the first 6 chapters of Daniel, which is narrative and it's stories. Starting in chapter 7, you have prophetic material. It's actually apocalyptic material. We have an apocalyptic book in the New Testament known as the Revelation. The Apocalypse is the real name of it in the Greek. And it means the unveiling. Like you unveil a new picture that, Rembrandt painted or something. First time people get a glimpse. And it's apocalyptic. And it builds on many of the things that are in the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, 2 times you have a reference. If you're looking at a King James version, it'll call it the abomination of desolation. And that is a reference to Antiochus, who took for himself the surname Epiphanes. An epiphany is a revelation of God. He considered himself to be God. And imposed emperor worship in the temple. Put his image in there. Commanded that people worship him. Killed hogs on the altar so they couldn't use it anymore to sacrifice to the real God. You have Daniel and his friends standing firm for their faith in several situations. And God blesses them and takes care of them every time. The point of all of this, and it's fleshed out even more fully in the book of the Revelation, is that, and here's the point, both of these books have the same point. And here it is. Even if they kill you, they cannot hurt you. Even if they kill you, they cannot hurt you. Because you have something they cannot take away. And you have a life beyond this life. Well, one of the more familiar of the stories of faithfulness doesn't really include Daniel, but it includes his three friends whose names were changed. By the way, they were changed by Nebuchadnezzar. What Nebuchadnezzar did in bringing these young guys into his school for training, he was trying to brainwash them and trying to impose and to unite in his vast empire. He now tries to unite all the provinces in a common worship. And in the common worship of himself. That statue 90 feet tall, with the bands playing, the dulcimers, flute, harp, sackbuts, etc., and all kinds of music. They could have just said that one thing and left out the particulars if they wanted to. But all of that, just a great... if you've seen any historical footage, of the Third Reich and all of the pomp and the splendor and the big swastika up there, and there's a little bitty Hitler up there, just all emotional, and the people just drinking it in, One of the best ways to unite conquered peoples is to unite them religiously. And if you're the king, if you can get them to worship you, and if you can get them to believe that you are God, then they will do pretty much whatever you say. That has happened in the modern era, namely with the Third Reich and also with the Japanese Empire that we fought against in World War II, and that was set up that way too. Their emperor they viewed as the incarnation of God. And we have some Islamic groups today that follow in that same pattern. It's not a new thing, it's a very old thing. And the reason it continues is because largely it seems to have worked with some people. But it doesn't work with everybody. Here's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The king renames them. Shadrach. Names another one Meshach. Names another one Abednego. And these reflect names of Babylonian gods. Gave them new names so that every time somebody called them, they were calling the name of what was supposed to be their new religion, you see. You keep hammering it in and hammering it in and hammering it in and hammering it in. But it's not working very well with them. What do you do when the fiery furnace is heated up 7 times hotter than usual? The king is going to proclaim himself as God on the plains of Jura. Has this 90-foot statue of himself set up. And just in case somebody's reluctant, he has an alternative over here behind the curtain. You can pick the image or you can pick what's behind the curtain, which is the fiery furnace. So he's got a double motivation for people to worship him. Worship him because you believe I am king, or worship me because you don't want to fry. And so they have the ceremony, and all the bands are playing, and everybody bows down except for 3. We don't know where Daniel was that day, but he obviously was off somewhere. Didn't get there. Couldn't make it. But the three that were there they were standing. It was real obvious who's kneeling and who's standing. I mean, that's kind of an obvious thing in a public gathering, isn't it? Unless you're just real short, you know. And so there they are standing, and word gets back to Nebuchadnezzar. And his robes are offended, you know, that they have offended the dignity of my kingly stature. And he's all upset. And of course they're Chaldeans, they're native of Babylon. And you got these 3 Jewish boys that have been promoted over them, and there's jealousy and all kinds of things involved. And so these Chaldeans make a beeline for the king and tell him. And so he interviews them. And they say, well, just to make it clear, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. But if he doesn't choose to do so, we're still not going to bow down. Whatever you do. And so then they throw more wood on the fire. Heat it up 7 times hotter. I can remember the old wood stove in the hallway at my mama's house. I used to love, when she wasn't looking, to shoot it with a water pistol. That might have had to do with some of the rust holes in the side of it. But that thing, you can fill it up with pine slabs and put a layer of pine cones underneath it to start it. And that thing will just get to just rocking. That's how that fiery furnace was doing. They threw them guys in there, and it was the strongest, most mighty men in the army that did it. And when they threw the guys in there, the flames leapt out and killed them. Down in the fiery furnace they went. You know what they said is they fell down in there, don't you? So far, so good. Well, you know, it's a picture of persecution for any believer in the real God. All who will live godly shall suffer persecution. Apostle Paul said that. And if you're going to be faithful to the Lord, you'll be opposed in this world, because the world has a current. It's just like a river. It has a current in it. A dead fish can go downstream, no problem. Takes a live one to go upstream. And you and I, when we receive Jesus Christ as our Lord, we've committed ourselves to go against the flow. And it takes everything we've got. And then some that He has to be able to do that. By the way, if you're carrying along, there's a waterfall on down there a little ways, round the bend. You might not see it, but it's coming. And so you don't want to be swept along. Most of the world is being carried headlong toward hell. And they're whistling all the way just because they don't see it, they think it's not real. Well, just because I might not could see that wall over there doesn't mean I won't encounter it if I go that way. You know. So how can we stand faithful when the fiery furnace is heated and our enemy, the devil, goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour? He's all froth and bluster, but he's stronger than we are. And he has quite a bit of power compared to us. He's smarter than we are. He's been messing with people's minds ever since the Garden of Eden. He has made a thorough study of human nature, and He knows just how to appeal to us. And He knows just how to threaten us. He appeals with one hand and threatens us with the other. Just like Nebuchadnezzar. So here we have a test. Let's look for a few moments at the test, and then we'll look at the testimony of these young men. What was their test? Well, first of all, it involved a desire for pleasure. It's going to be a great event. Here, the whole plain of Dura, filled up with people from all the provinces, and anybody who is anybody is going to be there. And there's going to be music, all this cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, dulcimer, and all kinds of music. Oh, it's great. Yeah. Going to probably have fried chicken after it's over, big table. Whatever you want, eat and drink. Just a great time. Big party. Everybody get to know each other. All feel good. Feel good. By the way, worship that's centered on feel good, you better watch out for it. Purpose of worship is not to feel good. Purpose of worship is to find God, not feel good. And religion has been used and continues to be used with a feel good motivation to enslave people. You heard of a guy named Karl Marx? You ever read the Communist Manifesto? Written by Marx and a guy named Engels. You know what Karl Marx said about religion? He said it's the opiate of the masses. It's a drug that we can use to enslave the masses. That's what Nebuchadnezzar's trying to do. But this trial or this test that these young men are having to face involves a desire for pleasure. Going to be a good time. The music actually probably was pretty good. After all, the ones playing the music didn't want to be thrown in the fire. It also involved the demands of authority. Notice the herald, when everybody got together, verse 4, the herald cried aloud, "To you it is suggested." Is that right? To you it is commanded that at what time you hear all this music, you bow down. And if you don't bow down, there's a fiery furnace. Same hour, you'll be thrown right in. Right in. Right in. Right in. You know, my mother was a firm believer in you got punished right then. There was a time or two she'd say, "When we get home," boy, that was even worse because the punishment continued till after we got home. You know, my daddy could just give me a look and I'd just melt. And he could reach from one end of the church pew to the other and thump. It was about sound like a watermelon. Boom. He could get me if he needed to. Yeah. Lots of little judgment days there. The demands of authority. You have to bow down. It's commanded. And if you don't, you'll be thrown in the fire. It's commanded. You know, those guys could have said, "Well, you know, Shad, Mitch, we don't have a choice." You know, in our hearts, you know, we could be like the little boy that his mama told him to go sit down over there. And he went and sat down. A little bit later, his mother looked over there and he said, "I'm standing up on the inside." They could have said, "We can be standing up on the inside and not bow, but we look like we bow, so that, you know, that way we can continue to have good influence for God amongst these people. And if we're gone right now, we won't have any more influence." Lots of ways we can rationalize doing wrong. And, you know, most anything that I want to do, I can figure out some way to get to do it. I bet you can too. I have 2 lists of things. 2 lists of things to do. I have my want to list and my ought to list. Guess which list I like the best? Yeah. You know what a big part of the Christian life is about? It's about changing my want to list so it's the same thing as my ought to list. Hopefully there's some overlap in it now. But I got some work to do. I bet you do too. Their test involved the demands of authority, the desire for pleasure, and also the dread of punishment. Dread of persecution. You know, nobody wants to be persecuted, do we? None of us want to be opposed. None of us want to be ridiculed. None of us want to be made fun of. None of us want to be whipped. None of us want to be made a public example of or a spectacle out of. None of us like that. Those things are not good, and they're certainly not something we would seek after. And the threat of that, oftentimes is worse than when it actually happens. There's another thing. It involved the disapproval of friends. These weren't the only Jews. There was a whole bunch of young Jewish guys that were brought to Babylon and that were companions of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. And the rest of them bowed down. Can you see them all over there? Maybe in the little Jewish section, there's all these other guys, they're bowing down. And come on, get down, guys. What, you think you better than us? Man, you have to be some kind of super spiritual, or we're not going to hang around with you anymore. Yeah. Some of the worst persecution comes from fellow believers. That it rubs salt into their open wounds when they see us be faithful and they're not willing to. Yeah. Yeah. Because in their heart they know they should be standing too. It finally involves a decision about right and wrong. The problem is, most of the time before we get down to the deciding about right and wrong, we've already been swayed by the demands of authority or the desire for pleasure or the dread of persecution or the disapproval of friends. If we get deep enough at it, it comes down to what's right and wrong. Unfortunately, that's the level that many professing believers really don't operate a whole lot at. Just think now, when's the last time you did something or didn't do something because in your heart, other people doing it, other people not doing it, whatever it was, but in your heart you couldn't bring yourself to do it because it was not right. And when's the last time you publicly, in a gathering of people, didn't do the right thing? Yeah. We see the trial, and we face that kind of trial every now and then, don't we? Notice, secondly, their testimony. This is what got them through it. In the companion volume to this, known as the Book of the Revelation, written years later, when the fifth of the seven seals is opened, I think it's in Revelation 6, John in heaven sees under the altar the souls of the martyrs who had died for their faithfulness. And they're crying out to the Lord, to the one on the throne, how long before you avenge us and do right and vindicate us against those who have oppressed and killed us? And we have more than one glimpse of this same group. When you get over to chapter 12, they appear again and we're given a little more insight. That's a wonderful book. It's like a drama. And you have scenes and things that pop up again and again. In the 12th chapter, we're told that they overcame the beast by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. You know when you need to give a testimony? It's not in a worship service necessarily. When you need to give your testimony is when you're put on trial for your life. We saw that from the Apostle Paul in Acts 26. These young men are brought before the king, and he says, maybe you didn't understand. When you hear the music play, you bow down. And that's all there is to it. You hear the music start playing, you bow down, and everything's good. Then we go eat chicken. But if not, there's the fiery furnace. And what God do you think is going to deliver you out of my hand? I'm here, He ain't. Wrong. Look at their answer. Look at their testimony. Number one, they were prepared to answer. For one thing, they were smart enough to know that if they did the right thing, they was going to be asked to explain. Remember I think it's in 1 Peter 1:16. Sanctify the Lord in your heart. Be ready always to give an answer to everyone that asks you a reason of the hope that's within you with meekness and fear. See, if you're doing right, people are going to ask you. They are. If nobody asks you, it's because they think you're just like they are. Yeah. These young guys got asked. Because when the chips were down, they were going to do the right thing. But they knew they were going to be asked, so they were ready. You know what gathering like this is for? It's to help us get ready to answer. It's a big part of why we're here. They were prepared to answer. Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful. We're not worried. We're not anxious to answer you in this matter. We don't have anything to hide. It's not a matter of anxiety for us. If it's like you said, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. But if He chooses not to, we're still not going to do what you said." They were prepared to answer. Notice their personal faith. They said, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us." He's not just, we know there's a God up there that doesn't agree with this, and so we're going to side with Him this time. No, He's not that God that's up there. He's our God. By the way, nothing wrong with saying our God. Doesn't mean we own Him. It means He owns us. Nothing wrong with saying our church. Doesn't mean we own it. It means it owns us. We belong to this church. Yeah? It's a matter of surrender. Our God, whom we serve. We're not here serving King Nebuchadnezzar. We're here trying to do what's right in the sight of our God. And so this is just part of our service. Their personal faith in God. When you're put on trial, when you're put to the test, then it comes to the surface whether or not you have a real walk with God. It really does. It comes to the surface whether you really do have any kind of prayer life or not, whether you really do have any kind of study life or not, whether you really have been committing His Word, hiding it in your heart so that you wouldn't sin against Him. All of that rises to the surface when you put on trial. We see they were prepared to answer. We see they have personal faith in God. We see they have a principled lifestyle. Our God whom we serve. We live by the principle of serving God. If it benefits Him, if it honors Him, if it obeys Him, we do it. And if it doesn't, we don't do it. Whatever God said we do, and whatever God said not to, we don't do. And notice they talk about the power of God. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. He can. You see, they've seen God at work in their own lives before. He worked it out so they got to eat vegetables instead of the king's meat that had been offered to idols back in chapter 1. They've seen Him at work already. He spared their lives and promoted them in the province of Babylon, so that they've got pretty high up offices, which they didn't aspire to, but God worked it out so they had them. They recognized where the successes came from, you see. It wasn't because I'm so smart, it's because He's able. We see their peaceful submission. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us, but if not, if He doesn't deliver us, be it known unto thee, O King, we will not bow down to not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. We will not. Not very tactful answer. Sometimes tact gets in your way, you know. Two boys liked the same girl. The two boys in the story, their name was Contact and Tact. Tact was trying to figure out the way, and Contact went and asked her for a date. He's the one that had the girl. Married her. We see their peaceful submission. We're willing to leave it in God's hands if He delivers us or not. Positive resolution. We will not serve your gods. Whatever happens, we're not going to do it. Are there certain things that you've already settled in your heart that you're not going to do? You better get them settled before the fiery furnace is heated up and is right over there. You better decide how you're going to respond before you get in the situation where you're commanded to bow down and it looks like you're hemmed in with no choice. Just like as a young teenager, you don't wait to decide whether you're going to have premarital sex till you're in the back seat of somebody's car on the back side of the field somewhere. You got to make that choice and that decision before you get in the situation. Or you're going to do the wrong thing. It's a dangerous thing to wait to decide until you're in the situation, and because then the desire for pleasure and the demands of authority and the disapproval of friends and the dread of persecution will make you do the wrong thing every time. And you'll put it off. Next time I'll do the right thing. But there might not be one. So let me ask you this. In the long scheme of things, in your day-to-day life, not in here but out there, do you get asked why you do certain things, why you don't do certain things, why you live a certain way, why you behave a certain way, why you pray a certain way, why you're different? If you're never asked, that's a real big clue that people don't see you as any different from them. And they don't see you any different from them if they don't hear anything different from you or observe anything different in you. Are you part of the other Jews that are bowing down to the image? Or are you one of the three that's standing up in your day-to-day life? What about persecution and opposition? Now remember, in those Beatitudes, Jesus said some things about blessed are you when men persecute you, say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. If we bring it on ourselves, it ain't persecution. You see. We live in a world that is dominated by the evil one. He doesn't know that he's about to be dethroned. He goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. It was sort of like Judgment Day on a miniature scale when they stood before Nebuchadnezzar, but they passed that test because that was the wrong king. Standing before the real judgment bar of God, they were vindicated. And you know that persecution, I'm going to jump ahead. We're going to finish this tonight. We'll finish it via the internet. Look up Jennifer's Facebook page. Get right on. When they were thrown in the fiery furnace, the only thing that burned was the ropes that tied them up. Set them free in the furnace. They got a new glimpse of the one that was walking around in there with them. They weren't running around beating on the sides trying to get out. The king said, I see 4 men loose walking in the fiery furnace. Cool, calm, collected, walking around in the fire. And everybody crowded around to see those upon whose bodies the fire had no hurt, we're told in the text. We'll talk about it more fully tonight. The question right now is, are you faithful? That's the question. If you're here today and you have never personally received Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, never publicly confessed that He is your Lord and that you're giving your life to Him to follow Him the rest of your life as He helps you to do that. If you've never done that, I'm going to ask you to come and sit down in the middle of this front pew right here as she plays music. And we'll help you to be able to do that in just a moment when the music's over. If you are a believer in Christ and have surrendered your life to follow Him, just